Good morning. Thank you for coming this morning. This is the first panel of Ebertfest. Wow, 18 years. This is very exciting. So what we're going to do today is the focus of this morning's panel is really about having a conversation about understanding, acceptance, inclusion, and respect of individuals. And what I want to do is, first of all, to thank the Champaign County Alliance for the promotion of acceptance, inclusion, and respect. Thank them for their sponsorship. They will be also sponsoring the screening of Love and Mercy, which will be at 4:30 on Saturday. And what I really hope to do is to start a conversation here that we can carry into the film and perhaps even extend after the film is done. So I really invite you to participate in that particular conversation. What I'd like to do is have the panelists introduce themselves. We have a really diverse panel. We have individuals who are critics, individuals who are writers about film. We have an author who has written about issues of disability. We have professionals who deal in these areas. And so what I'd like to do is have everyone introduce themselves and then use a few questions to frame our conversation and then leave some time at the end to take questions from you all. So we will start right here with Chuck.
Hello, my name's Chuck Kaplensky. I'm the film critic for the News Gazette here in town, and also WCIA3 TV, the CBS affiliate here in Champaign-Urbana as well.
Good morning, Jennifer Knapp. I'm with Community Choices. We are a cooperative serving adults with developmental disabilities.
Matt Soller-Seitz. I'm the editor-in-chief of RogerEbert.com and the television critic for New York Magazine.
I'm Allison Lewis. I'm a self-published author. I write stories about people with disabilities for young kids.
I'm Philip Krein. I'm the president of the Champaign County Developmental Disabilities Board, which is a volunteer organization that works with taxpayer funds to support issues and programs in those areas.
I'm Richard Laskowski. I taught cinema history here for quite a few years, and have written film reviews and film columns for the News Gazette since 1979.
My name is John Iceberg. I'm a musician, filmmaker, and a special education teacher. I teach students with emotional disabilities.
Mark Dusick. I'm a film critic, contributor for RogerEbert.com, and I run MarkReviewsMovies.com too.
I'm Joel Mosagi. I'm a counselor at Parkland College, and I've worked with developmental disabilities and mental health for the last almost 30 years now.
Okay, thank you. And my name is Eric Pearson. I am a professor of communication at the University of San Diego and a proud alum of the University of Illinois. So I'm always happy to be back here. So I'd like to start with where there's a lot of discussions about acceptance and inclusion and respect, which seem to be sort of tied to the stresses of our day. So I was wondering if someone would like to sort of frame where we are in terms of those conversations, and then from there I'd like the critics perhaps to talk to us about where movies and cinema have come in helping us to deal with some of those issues. So I open it up to anyone who wants to help with that question.
So where are we?
Yes.
We're here. and I think part of it is that being in this community is unusual in the sense that we want to still have that conversation. But I think in the larger environment of the United States, we're still uncomfortable with it. We're still uncomfortable with really delving into the minutiae of what makes mental health and developmental disabilities an issue that we all need to consider that conversation on. I mean, I always as a professional in this field, I come from a professional standpoint, but I also come from an area where my brother did commit suicide. And so that conversation is personal to me, and it's not just theoretical. It's not just what I do, it's what I am today. And I think we all have to keep that conversation going beyond the theory and make it personal.
Go ahead,
I was gonna say, I taught students with emotional disabilities for 4 years, and then before that I worked with adults in group homes for 6 years. And the one thing that I remember is that Illinois is 51st in the nation for funding social services. And so, being in there and seeing how that if this is as bad as it gets, then you look at other places like Minneapolis that have really progressive, I don't know, you just hear about, for example, there was a group home in Charleston where a resident was killed by the workers there, right? They basically beat him over some stupid thing, made him hold books while they beat him, took him to the hospital, and because a lot of times there's an inability to communicate effectively, right? So and a high tolerance for pain, because a lot of times they're in pain and can't communicate that, and so this guy died, right? So I think that it's very frustrating to always have these conversations about stigma and what we can do and look around and still have so much left to do, So that's kind of my thought on that.
Okay. Anyone else want to jump in? Well, let me ask those of us who look at film for a living, where are spaces and places where film might help us to expand this conversation that we're talking about? And how far have we come? When I was thinking about this, I was sort of thinking about traditionally the ways in which film have dealt with mental illness, going all the way back to Sybil
Well,
4 decades ago. So yeah,
I think with any sort of film, especially Hollywood products, it's a double-edged sword. We've certainly come a long way from Olivia de Havilland in The Snake Pit. I mean, certainly we've done that. And obviously, film can raise awareness about certain issues. If you look at something like A Beautiful Mind or Love and Mercy, yes, they bring this issue to the forefront. But at the same time, a Hollywood product isn't going to go into or capture the day-to-day struggles of dealing with issues such as this. I wish that more people saw documentaries, because I think that that's where we can fill in this gap you're talking about, to give a more realistic portrayal of these issues. I think then would raise awareness in a more honest way, and then perhaps, get some changes made.
Matt, were you going to weigh in there?
I was just thinking about, I've had a lot of conversations on Twitter in the last year or 2 years about portrayals of mental illness in movies and on television, and I think it's become considerably more sophisticated in my lifetime, but I'm struck by how often a plot twist, when they want to pull the rug out from under an audience, they will reveal that a character is mentally ill, and and that some other characters in the film that you thought were real people were just figments of their imagination. That's happened in a lot of films in the last 20 years. And also having movies like, there was a whole run of films in the 80s and 90s that were basically about people being terrorized by mentally ill people. Like, Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct and was it the Unlawful Entry, that movie with Ray Liotta, and there's a million of them. It was like an entire shelf at Blockbuster at one point. And at the time, I don't remember too many people complaining about that specific aspect of it. There were other issues that were complained about, but not that. And to me, that seems remarkable in retrospect. There was a screening of Dress to Kill, the Brian De Palma movie Dress to Kill, which is, I think, technically a masterpiece, but as they say, problematic in a lot of different ways. The therapist is mentally ill, and one of the ways he expresses his mental illness is by dressing up like a woman in gigantic, the sunglasses that Faye Dunaway would have worn to the Oscars in 1975, and slashing people with a razor. And it's not, not the most progressive portrait of people with mental illness issues. But, yeah, I'm sort of interested in it from a standpoint of genre. Like, I think about, there was an article, it was around the time that The Sopranos was on TV. The New York Times wrote an article that said, essentially, if Tony Soprano were on Prozac, there would not be a show. I'm not really sure that that's true, but it went on to argue that if Hamlet could take Prozac, he would not have any issues. It was a very strange, like, did the pharmaceutical industry plant this article? It was weird, but it got me to thinking about how mental illness, disability, and other issues like that are made into tools of drama, and how they do and don't reflect issues related to the human personality. Like to what degree are those used as a crutch in storytelling, and what degree are they used in really interesting ways that sort of transcend time? Like, we don't have the same sophisticated understanding of the issues that say, I think Hamlet was depressed. I think it's pretty clear that Hamlet was clinically depressed, among other things, with good reason. And there may have been some issues that predated his family problems. But I don't think putting him on Prozac necessarily would have eliminated the story of Hamlet. It's all very complicated. Anyway.
I'm just thinking the fact that we're actually able to have a conversation like this and talk about movies from the 80s and 90s, or even going back to Psycho, where the entire thing is just stops dead for a rambling psychoanalytical analysis of the guy that makes absolutely no sense. But now we're actually talking about it specifically. We're talking about Brian Wilson and what he went through and how he was misdiagnosed by someone who's trying to take advantage of him. We're actually having talks about that. It's not necessarily a plot device, it is the story. And also the idea that someone like Brian Wilson is more than just what he suffers from with mental health issues, that he is a human being, and that he has more to his life than just that. And I think that the more that films portray people with mental health issues as having a life beyond whatever they're suffering from, I think that that's a good direction to take. I'm thinking even like A Beautiful Mind, where it is, big plot twist that he suffers from that, but it still does show him having a life. I think that that film was a bit of a watershed moment, potentially, even despite the cheap inclusion of the plot twist that he suffers from schizophrenia. But I think that that was kind of a good moment for us to start having this conversation about the depiction of mental illness in film. For all of its flaws, I still think it works really well, but as a film, but it's still worthwhile. So I think the more that we get seeing people as human beings with lives beyond that, and I think that's a good place to start going.
Yeah, and I think we have to go beyond and say, I am not my diagnosis. Yes, that's my diagnosis. However, I am a lot of other things. My brother was an entrepreneur in this community, owned quite a few apartment buildings and things like that. And yes, he did suffer a mental illness. And he was more than that. He was a father. He was a husband. Gabe's Place Apartments was my brother. And we have to see people in their entirety rather than just that thing that brings them to our knowledge. There is a lot more to us. We all are more than just what people see of us. There's a complexity to it. And unfortunately, I think as a society, we seem to want to dilute things to sound bites, to very small things. They say, see, that's it. It's more, you're more than that, and we're more than that. And in dealing with clients from mental health, and when I worked at the children's home and things like that, and or even a DSC, you have to look at the whole person. You have to deal with the whole person, as opposed to just one part of them.
Can those of you who are the professionals in this area, can you speak to some of the challenges that you face? And again, at the end of the day, resources are extremely important, right? But today I can't write anyone a check for anything. So what I hope we can do is give ourselves something that we can do individually. And so if you could help us understand sort of what we can do individually and how we can participate in this conversation that would be helpful as well. Can I start with you, Jennifer?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I think there's a couple things. So one is that people with disabilities want to have valued social roles just like anyone else. And so similar to, sorry, I don't know what your name is down there, but when he was saying that people are more than their disability, and that often means just giving an opportunity to do other things. So for example, the arts are a way that many people with disabilities are interested. And so as opposed to just having them be the subjects of films or of information going on, that they could actually be a part of it. And so that's some of the things that we are trying to do is give opportunities for people with disabilities to try doing art or doing film or music or other things that's not just about the disability, but it's about connecting with other people in the community. And all of us can actually be a part of that.
Well, and let me comment that certainly when I was a kid growing up in the 1960s, people with developmental disabilities and other severe problems effectively didn't exist. They were institutionalized, they were segmented out of the community. We now live in a new generation where our children actually grow up with these kinds of exposures, and that's a huge difference. And I think for all of us, you know, when you see the young man in the parking lot who's working carts, who may not be very verbal, doesn't understand how to say hello, you know, he's not being unfriendly, he's just struggling to get by and be part of the community. And I think all of us need to get used to interacting with folks like that and being able to consider them citizens like anyone else.
Okay. Allison.
I'll say that I think it's important to start exposing children from a very young age, because a lot of times kids don't have exposure to those with disabilities unless they have a relative or a friend, because it's not talked about in schools the way that it should be. And a lot of the films and books that are written or created nowadays focus more on overcoming and curing versus what Joe was saying as far as living a life and getting to know the actual person instead of their disability and what needs to be done to overcome said disability.
Okay. Thank you. John.
Yeah, I think just from what I've seen, a lot of times it just seems like consistency and follow-through with people goes a long way. I mean, I work with, you know, if you want to talk about stigma and things that people are uncomfortable talking about, we can talk about abuse, right? Because people with disabilities are the #1 group of people who are abused. I teach kids in middle school, right? I had a 6th grader, my first year, who had PTSD. Every single student I've taught has been abused, physically, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it just breaks your heart. And you think about the fact that these kids are tossed around from group home to group home, or foster care family to foster family, or their parents have mental illness as well, right? They have no structure, right? And then they come to school and they lose their mind because that's maybe the safe place, right?
Right.
So, you know, you think about, like, some kids go to school and they keep it together, and then they go home and they kind of lose it because they feel safe, right? And it almost feels like the opposite. These kids keep it together at home, and they come to school and they kind of lose it because they feel safe enough to express those feelings of anger and rage. And in Love and Mercy, you have someone with mental illness who was manipulated by basically a sociopath for like 8 years, right? And that's really scary to think about, you know? I think about Brian Wilson, the one thing that I always thought about is, like, you listen to his music, it's so beautiful. You think about someone who might go through some pain like that and writing, he didn't write like angry punk songs, right? He wrote Love and Mercy, he wrote God Only Knows. It's just the most beautiful thing, you know? And so I think that's the thing to take away, is that when I look at these kids who have been through these horrible things, and it just breaks your heart, you know, when they celebrate these little things like, he didn't swear today, or he didn't throw a chair across the, you know, he actually, like, opened the book for a second, I'm sorry. Those are huge steps for those people to take. So I think, going back to what other people said, is these little things to acknowledge, you know, as being a huge thing for that kid, you know. Not just, because I've seen, not to talk too much, but, like, these kids will have the worst day ever of their life, but then they come back the next day to school, right? And they had it with me or something, right? And that's so much bravery and courage of these kids, you know, and they're kids. I mean, they're like 12. Right. So.
Joe, did you want to add something?
I worked at Cunningham Children's Home as a day student coordinator. And going back to what John just mentioned, school is a safe place. School is the only stable environment that they know. I had a day student who, when Cunningham had both day students and residential students living on campus, who on the weekend, most of the time, he wouldn't go home. But on Monday, he would show up at school because that was the place where he felt safe. That was a place where we acknowledged who he is as a human being. And I think when we as a society get beyond our own individual fears, and sometimes even going to your families, remember Uncle John that stays upstairs that doesn't come down during Thanksgiving? Many of us have that. But do we talk about it? We have to get over our own individual fears and discomfort about talking about these types of issues. Because if we don't really open ourselves up to the conversation, it stays in a very small environment and we don't get better.
Right. So I want to pick up on something you said, Joe, which I find fascinating. We live in a confessional culture where people go onto blogs and YouTube and share everything with us, right? And part of me wonders if that sharing becomes more about them and not about me understanding the condition, and maybe it's not helping. I don't know, but I'd like you all to wrestle with that because I don't know. We talk more about it, but are we understanding it more in that conversation? So anybody that wants to weigh in on that, please do.
Well, I really do think that there's a lot of a generational thing. I think for our children, it is a way for them to understand things
Okay.
better. I think for those of us who look at this piecemeal, it's probably not so much. So, how do young people communicate with each other? And how do they describe their own experiences and so forth? And it really is on a different level. So, for us looking at that, it's easy to see a kind of a confusing, fulfilling sort of thing rather than a true interaction.
So the relationships that we have, how deep are they? I mean, when I do a self-confessional on Facebook or YouTube or whatever media it is, it's just me throwing something out. But I don't connect with Mark as an individual, as a person. And I think when it comes to intellectual disabilities or mental illness, it's about that connection. How do I make myself really human? How do you help me make myself really human? And it's that connection that will help us. I mean, in this community, just about a week ago, a young man did commit complete suicide. And his family had a very powerful obituary, and in which they put in some of his writing, and in some of his writing he talked about his own mental illness. And if we all heard that prior to him dying, and we all really actually listened and don't say, oh, well, you're just looking for attention.
Right.
He might be here today. He might be here today. So we've got to have a conversation that's just more than just surface. Yeah, I threw all kinds of stuff out there. However, you that listen to me, are you connecting with me?
And just to add on to that, I work with a lot of people who have autism. And so in the autism community, often face-to-face communication is the most difficult. And so through the web, people can find connections to people that they couldn't face-to-face. And so there's a lot of people that feel like, oh, someone actually speaks my language that they found through blogs or other websites, as well as they give themselves permission to talk in ways that they wouldn't face-to-face. So there can be some healing elements of the anonymity of the web.
And then too, people who write film criticism, post it online, can have a role in this too, because You might have, you know, quality films that deal with mental health issues or other stigmatized issues, and documentaries that deal with them. But usually films of that sort, unless it's, you know, unless it's A Beautiful Mind, say, or The King's Speech, they don't have this sort of budgets to let people know sufficiently about the films. And it's the function of critics to inform people of what films are out there, what they deal with, and perhaps, you know, elaborate on the issues that the film presents in order to generate interest in those films. So I think that you know, that sort of media coverage, whether it's in newspapers or magazines or online, is also important here.
Allison, do you have an online presence? Do you have a blog or something that you work?
Yes, I do. I was going to say that I have both a blog and a discussion forum on my author website. And I always invite my readers to comment on my blogs and contribute to the discussion forums. But even when they don't, I a lot of times feel better knowing that my thoughts are out there, because even if no one reads it today, it's not going to go away. So it could very well help someone 5, 10 years from now. Because as we all know, things on the internet never disappear.
And they're always true.
They're always out there.
I would actually just say, I found that that's actually not true. Sometimes things do disappear on the internet. I've been advising everyone who writes anything to save a copy of your work offline rather than trust the website to. This is my little public service announcement to the writers. I say that because I lost an incredible archive of work last year, assuming that the website that housed it was always going to be there, and it wasn't. So, I was looking through some old work that I wrote 20 years ago, and I was in my late 20s, and I had lived in New York a few years, and I thought of myself as a fairly enlightened young liberal man. And I noticed that the word retarded was in a number of these reviews, like just casually referring to people with Down syndrome, characters in movies. And it wasn't like a hurtful, like, you know, used as a slur or anything, but it was just used as a descriptive term, and that really jumped out at me. And I thought, wow, I can't believe that I used to throw that word around. And it got me to thinking about how I didn't become aware of that as being in any way a loaded word until I became friends with a guy who, he was an actor who had worked with me on some films that we made together. And his day job is managing group homes for people with disabilities. And he heard me use that word to refer to somebody with Down syndrome. And he said, you know, I work with people with that condition all day, and I'm not comfortable with that word. Like, you know, I would prefer that if I'm within earshot that you don't use that word around me. And I became extremely self-conscious, and after that point I made an effort not to use that word anymore, and I think I've been pretty successful at it. But I only bring that up because one of the hobby horses that I'm constantly riding as a critic is there is a tendency, whatever era that we are in, to think that this era is the most enlightened era, like we've reached peak enlightenment. And people in the 70s, when I was a kid, I remember people talking about like, you know, people congratulating themselves on their enlightenment and how liberal and understanding and tolerant they were. And you go back and you look at the pop culture from the time, and you've got like Bob Hope making homophobic jokes on the Oscars. The Oscars. What a place to make homophobic jokes, the freaking Oscars, really. Bob Hope. And you know, who knows how many gay and lesbian people were in the audience. And they're laughing too, I guess, because it's like, well, what are you gonna do? You know? And it just makes me think, like, what issues, like I feel like mental health, the stigma surrounding mental illness and emotional kind of conditions is is at the moment one of the final frontiers. And I still encounter some resistance when I write about it online and when I talk about it on Twitter and Facebook. There's still a tendency, and I think Hollywood does a lot to push this narrative, that depression particularly is something that can be cured by meeting a nice girl or boy.
Yeah.
Like everything will be fine. Like once you meet, you know what you need? You need to meet a nice young man, and everything will be fine. And then it usually is. Like at the end, it's like they walk off into the sunset together, and there's a ballad playing or something. And there's a lot of this kind of thing, and this idea that depression is a condition solely imposed by your circumstance and not a chemical thing is something that I still think there's some resistance to. And I think there's a lot of resistance to other issues related to that. And also casting is something I was hoping we could talk about a little bit today, because there have been a number of pieces, and actually I published a few of them at the site, talking about the idea that people with characters with disabilities should perhaps not immediately be cast with actors who are abled. And the pushback that you get is, well, unless you cast somebody like a Daniel Day-Lewis or Julianne Moore or somebody like that, you can't get the funding to make the movie. I understand that point of view. It's a tricky, tricky thing, but I also wonder if we're not being deprived of some great actors who are in wheelchairs or who have some other issues that are maybe they're not 100% abled in the way that somebody like Daniel Day-Lewis is. Maybe we might be acclaiming an entirely different set of great actors if there wasn't that barrier. Like maybe we're getting cause and effect backwards sometimes, and I don't know exactly what I mean by that, but I only bring it up because I think, again, yeah, I like to think I'm a nice, enlightened person, but like maybe my own thinking is encrusted by these preconceptions to an extent where I can't mount an effective counter argument to, yeah, well, I have to cast Daniel Day-Lewis and not random New York actor who happens to be in a wheelchair because I won't get the money. Well, maybe if you cast another part in the movie with Daniel Day-Lewis, then you could give that other part to this other actor we haven't heard of. Like we don't think that way because we think we can't.
We don't think that way because it's money.
Yeah.
And it's and we have a society that's still vested in that individual rugged person. I did it. Depression, if you're depressed, it's a character flaw rather than a chemical issue. If you commit suicide, you're being selfish. So we've got to get beyond that. We've got to get beyond that. It's not an individual moral flaw that you have because of depression. It is a chemical imbalance. Mm-hmm. And when you complete suicide, it is not because you're weak. It is because you've had enough. Mm-hmm. And when we are so able-bodied in how we look at movies and things like that, to say we can't make a movie because we might not make enough money.
Right.
And money drives a lot of things. And if it's not driven by the dollar, it's driven by the look. Mm-hmm. We got to know about autism through Rain Man, although autistics were out there. We got to understand borderline personality disorder through Fatal Attraction. However, we've got to go beyond that. Mm-hmm. There is more to it.
And what role can all of us play? Because what you point to is that there are things that are unseen until movies say, look at this. And then all of a sudden we're interested in it. But we're only interested in it in the way it's been framed by the movie. Mm-hmm. And so the question is, what can we do, particularly the critics, to sort of say, look, this is, a film like Rain Man isn't all about Dustin Hoffman's performance, which is what most of the reviews will be about. They won't sort of take that next step and say, there's some other things going on here. But maybe in the world of blogs and long-form reviews, there may be an opportunity to do that. Yeah, John.
I guess my question is, do you really want to know what that's like, though? I mean, when I saw Love and Mercy, I had personal experience with someone like Eugene Landy. I was only with her for like 8 months, not the 8 years Brian Wilson spent. But I didn't, I went with like my girlfriend to see 2 movies. One, we went to see Gone Girl because I like David Fincher, and I was like, whoa, that was triggering. And then I was like, I probably should have read a little bit more about that. And then I love Brian Wilson. I grew up listening to the records, and I took my dad to see them when Carl Wilson was still alive, and that was really great. But I didn't really know too much other than I love Pet Sounds. And watching his portrayal of Landy really triggered me, like really badly. And I remember in the there's a scene in the studio when it's in the darkness, and then you hear his voice come over that was like, and I remember like, you were talking about like things that are believable or whatever, right? And do you believe it? I remember like, was it Melinda, Brian Wilson's wife, was like, oh, there are so many crazy things that happen, but we couldn't put them in the movie because no one would believe that happened. And I started laughing when I read that. I was like, oh my God, I totally know what that's like, you know? And so when you talk about things online, like people read, or, you know, like the little blogs and stuff, sometimes like your like support group is like, you know, like the criteria for meeting your support group is so crazy that like you take it where you can get it. So from a movie like Love and Mercy, which to me was like the most realistic depiction of emotional abuse that I've ever seen in a film. Having gone through that kind of thing myself, it's just to be able to identify, like, I love Brian Wilson's music, I always have, but to have that kind of respect for someone who was a survivor of that abuse just made me appreciate it so much more.
It seems remarkable to me that Brian Wilson could even get out of bed every day, let alone make that amazing music. I found out parenthetically something about Brian Wilson. I did this miniature film festival in San Francisco earlier in the year, and one of the films that we showed was Second, starring Rock Hudson. And I found out a piece of trivia, which is that was the last movie that Brian Wilson saw in a theater for 16 years, because he decided to go see it, and the main character in there is named Wilson. And he arrived at the film late, and as he was walking into the theater, somebody at that exact moment as he was walking into the theater, a character in the film said, good afternoon, Mr. Wilson, we've been expecting you. And he sat down and he watched like another 15 minutes of the movie, but he was so completely freaked out because he thought the movie was speaking directly to him. And then he got up and left, and he never set foot in a movie theater again until 1982 when he saw E.T. Like, and this is a guy who made some of the masterpieces of pop music. You know, it's incredible to think about.
Well, I'm certainly not a film critic, but one thing that I would like to see is people with various disabilities maybe not being the main character. So it's kind of like, you know, when you think about race, a lot of times it was, oh, it's only if there's an interracial relationship, that's the point. To get to the point where, oh, there's an interracial relationship, great. And so I think similar with disability and other stigmatized people, that maybe they're in the movie, but they're not the point, would be part of the thing that I would like to see us actually get to.
And I will say that particularly when I watch television now, interracial couples, the narrative is not about them being an interracial couple. They just happen to be a couple. And I think, you know, it's progress.
Right.
You know,
The hounds of hell are not nipping at their heels every single episode. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Chuck.
Well, I think, you know, a lot of us have referred to this morning as these baby steps that are being taken. And as Matt points out, these films, the films you want to see in which we don't have the movie star playing the disabled person, I think that'll happen. I mean, if you look at the landscape of media now, all the different release platforms that are out there, there are so many different corporations, different channels looking for programming. Netflix, Showtime, HBO. There are so many things out there that I think eventually this is going to happen. And I think it's going to be a huge, huge breakthrough. If you look at what Netflix has been doing, I mean, they seem to be the HBO now of this generation, as far as breaking down these boundaries and really being progressive in their programming. And, you know, you had mentioned, well, what can we do as critics or anyone up here? I mean, we just have to get the word out and really have a united front as far as wanting this, but also pointing out to things that, like Richard pointed out, documentaries and other things. You know, we live in an age now where programming is available to us in an unprecedented manner. I mean, it's all out there, or most of it. We just have to be the guys or gals who are the signposts pointing people in that direction.
And how hard is that? I mean, as I said, when you write about Rain Man, you have to write about Dustin Hoffman's performance, right? I mean, that's what people expect you to write about. How do we change the conversation, not just from what we're writing, but sort of to to start to tweak the expectations of the people that we're writing for.
Give them bad reviews. I mean, as Joe is pointing out, if money is the driving force, and it is, then they have to be held accountable.
I think there's also sometimes a tendency to use any kind of condition like that as an excuse to get the character in the situation that you want to see them in. And Rain Man's been mentioned a couple of times up here, and I remember even when that film came out, there were articles criticizing its depiction of autism by saying that what is depicted here is, for one thing, a relatively tiny percentage of autism cases. And on top of that, like even within that narrow percentage, pretty extraordinary, like basically he's like Superman.
Mm-hmm.
Like he goes to, like they ban him for the casinos in Vegas and stuff, and I don't know, like Rain Man and Starman would make a pretty good double feature.
And yet, when I tell people I work with people with autism, they say, "Oh, like Rain Man." Still today, I'm just saying, it's still. I mean, it's powerful in shaping what people's ideas are.
Yeah.
Mark, were you gonna?
I'm thinking, how many, Matt, do you happen to recall how many reviews or just articles about Rain Man when it came out talked about it? Like if you could give like a vague
No,
percentage?
and that's a wonderful example of one of my favorite cartoons, just as a journalist, and it used to be in my old newsroom at the Star-Ledger, was there was a journalist standing in front of a dartboard, and above the dartboard it said, "Today I am an expert in."
Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk
And
about.
on the dartboard it said like finance, the Electoral College, arts criticism, whatever, and he's
Yeah.
ready to throw the dart.
Yeah, but
And so that's a long way of saying, like, I think a lot of those reviews just said, what a brilliant, uncanny performance. He really captures what it's like to have autism. It's like probably the people writing that didn't know anybody who had autism, and they wouldn't know how to judge the relative accuracy of that performance anyway. I make fun a lot of the what X gets wrong about Y school of writing online. There's a lot of that, like what this movie, what is it? There's one that just recently came out.
Batman v
A
Superman?
movie about a private, like what Inherent Vice gets wrong about being a private detective. I don't think that's, if you made a list of the 20 things that movie cares about, an accurate depiction of the life of a private investigator would not be in the top 20. But I do think there's a place for those kind of judging the accuracy of something that's supposed to be accurate, I don't think anybody cared about the accuracy of Rain Man for the most part, except for people who maybe knew a little bit about the subject. It's always people who know about the subject who care the most about it, and ironically, those are the people who often are not in a mainstream platform position to really critique it.
Yeah, it seems like whenever a movie about a historical figure or a historical incident comes out, even the mainstream critics suddenly become experts in history and biography.
My friend Ali, who's a critic in Turkey, was joking about this. When that Margaret Thatcher movie came out with Meryl Streep, he said, "I cannot wait to see all the American film critics try to convince me that they're an expert in the life of Margaret Thatcher."
Yeah, exactly. But when movies like Love and Mercy or Short Term 12, if we want to talk about group homes, or Our Beautiful Mind, it doesn't seem like people try to make the effort. It doesn't seem like critics try to even make the effort to become experts, whether real or in quotation marks, about those subjects. And I think that we might need to take responsibility for what we put out there. If we're going to say this is an accurate depiction of a certain thing, we better be damn well sure that it at least kind of is close to it. Otherwise, we're helping out the preconception that Dustin Hoffman's performance in Rain Man is what it's like to have autism. That if we're doing that, and I think it's maybe time that we start looking at movies about mental health issues and take them from doing some damn research.
No, I mean, pretty much what you're saying, let's stop being lazy.
Yep.
If you want to write a review, go beyond just the performance. Autism is a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
It's a spectrum. And Rain Man is maybe here on that spectrum. And it's all the way down there.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to go beyond it. I mean, just like there are all individuals in here, every individual disability or mental illness is individual. You cannot paint everybody with a broad brush. And if movies are being made about this, when the reviews come out, let's talk about that specific corner of what it is. Just talk about that specific corner of it. Right. Said Rain Man was a good depiction of someone on the autism spectrum that had this type of skill.
Help us to share some knowledge with each other. So I'd like to invite folks up for questions. So while you're making your way up to the microphone, as is my tradition, I always like to leave the panelists with a final question, which we'll come back to at the end. And Matt always says I don't give him enough time to think about this question, so I'm going to give him enough time. When we get to the end of the Q&A, what I'd like you to do is to share a film or a television program or some sort of media interaction that helped you to understand and to become more accepting and inclusive and respectful of something that you didn't know about. So we'll come back to that at the end. You all set there, ma'am?
Am I on?
Yep, you are.
My name's Diane Zell. I am a volunteer with the National Alliance on Mental Illness. You could call me Dr. Mom. I have a son who has lived with mental illness for over 23 years. And I have made myself an expert. I teach classes to other family members who have family members living with mental illness. And the stigma issue that someone brought up. If you look in the dictionary, they say stigma is a mark of disgrace. It's like a separation from God. And in society, I'm afraid that's all too true. And unless we who live with mental illness or have family members who do speak out and aren't afraid to challenge this, I don't know how much change we're going to have. I liken it to the way people felt about cancer not so many years ago. That cancer was somehow, a weakness, that you brought this on yourself, you didn't talk about it, you talked about like it was the big C. Mm-hmm. And now people will give a benefit for you and bring casseroles to your house. And what I want to know is, where is my casserole? Okay, where's my son's casserole? And I just feel so strongly that unless we continue to talk about it, and until people are willing to put in the obituary that my loved one died of suicide, and don't try to hide it, don't try to sugarcoat it, it's a tragedy for everyone involved, that we'll still be hiding in 20 years. And I'm sorry, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Yeah, I think you bring up a really important point. I'm from San Diego, and the media has a policy of non-report when it comes to suicides, which means that it will not be listed as a cause of death. And they say their response is that we do it because talking about it encourages others to participate, as opposed to if people talked about it, when people go through those stresses and those troubles, they'll know that they are not alone in that conversation. Yeah, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've heard that too, and that's just such nonsense, because sometimes people just want to know that they're not alone.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so everything that you said really resonated with me, because you have to confront, I have to deal with a lot of horrible stuff, right? Like when kids come to me, and you read their history, and that's really uncomfortable because there's so much abuse, there's terrible things people have done to these kids, and yet they're typically the hardest kids to work with, right? High turnover of teachers, low support, high burnout rate, right? And it's like, if you don't have that conversation about the fact that this kid was abused for most of his life, or this kid's mom tried to burn his house down while he was in you know what I mean? This horrible stuff. And they just, like half the time, I think the kids just need to know that they're not alone, that they're not actually the bad kid, that they're probably the toughest kid in that school with the biggest heart. So yeah, to answer. Right.
Oh, hi, I'm Sandy Pagano. I'm a volunteer for the Heartland Film Festival in Indianapolis. That's a plug. I watch an awful lot of film. And I have a comment and then a question. Back to Jennifer. Your point about casting people with disabilities, what comes to mind is the young man in Breaking Bad. NPR interviewed every major male star in there except him. But I did see a printed interview with him in a medical magazine in a hospital waiting room. Now, who's going to see that? Okay, that's my comment. Now, in regards to the film, I do watch a lot of films. How does a filmmaker balance not being too extreme, either in a narrative or a doc, to put off his audience? And what do we need to do as viewers to find out what the real message is there? What are they trying to tell us? Is it getting through to us, or are we falling victim to somebody's agenda?
Is there a comment?
I'm waiting for.
Yeah,
We're processing.
It's just too loaded.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you bring that up, though, because I know that the Tribeca Film Festival and Robert De Niro, they dropped a film that dealt with, help me here,
Vaccines.
vaccines.
There's an anti-vaccine
Right, and then
documentary.
I read the other day that he regrets now having dropped the film from that film festival. So I think that we're all unsure on that. It's a very fine line. And I believe that the issue was about the filmmaker's agenda and the subject of that film. Having not seen the film, I can't really comment on it. But I think that we live in a society where we're so cautious about offending. We're so cautious about ruffling anyone's feathers that works against us as far as getting these accurate portrayals out or being even open to hearing about it or talking about it, and that's a problem. I don't know how to solve that problem. I think you've brought forth an issue that really needs to be dealt with.
So maybe this is a group of people who, maybe as a group here, you guys don't mind being uncomfortable. However, I think the larger population doesn't like being uncomfortable. And if you have to watch a video or a movie that brings up their discomfort, they will not want to deal with that, unfortunately. I mean, even in conversations with your friends, where you bring up uncomfortable issues, do they change the subject? It's a movie you're going to sit in front of for 2 hours. Do you go out to dinner and talk about it? Do you do something about it? And I think, unfortunately, that kind of discomfort is what limits our ability to really move beyond where we are now.
Let me make a comment on that agenda question, though, and you brought up the film I was thinking about very much. You know, the disability community, the mental health community is still full of desperate parents, desperate families who feel the guilt and really the obligation to look anywhere that they can for anything, and are willing to grasp at anything that maybe would give them something. And unfortunately, there still is a very substantial community, some intentional, some not, who are happy to cash in on that. And I think we have to really push back very hard against that. So I was actually very pleased to see Robert De Niro making that kind of a decision, because there's no question that there are still plenty of people out there wanting to manipulate an uninformed public for their own purposes.
Question, ma'am.
My name is Judy Soderberg, and I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And you talked about ways to normalize, if you will, the life of people with significant disability. And I just wanted to describe a program to you that my son, who has had a major mental illness for over 20 years, was a participant in. It's called Interact. And the criteria for Interact is that you have some kind of a major disability and an interest in the arts. They have 2 tracks. They have a theater track and they have a visual arts track. The actors, no one there's no social worker on staff, if that tells you something. Everyone is treated as the arts person that they are. They do, their theater track does 2 or 3 programs in the community. They have even been at the Guthrie Center to do a production that they put together and developed themselves. And this happens 2 or 3 times. People in that production had Down syndrome, significant mental health issues, brain issues, significant accident issues, all kinds, and they were all actors in this production. On the other hand, in the visual arts area, they have their studios and they have a gallery. And they sell this artwork in the gallery, and the person that does it gets a certain percentage, just like you would in a regular gallery. So it's these kinds of opportunities that focus into the community that are able to show people with all kinds of disabilities and their abilities. And that's the point, I think. So anybody wanting to do a documentary, I'd really encourage you to take a strong look at Interact. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do you have a website? I think that needs a bigger plug. Do you have a website for your organization?
Interact has a website, yes.
Okay.
INTERACT, Interact.
That
Thank
sounds
you.
great. Thank you.
So, sir, you're going to be the last question. So the mic is yours. Step up.
Thank you. Well, first of all, my name is Bonnie, and I'm from Denver. I do want to piggyback on that. In Denver, we have an acting group called Family, and it is absolutely amazing. This past year, they went to Osaka, Japan, and lived on campus, on a disability campus. Everything was set up for them. If you can imagine taking all these people with wheelchairs and whatever. So I think what she's saying is a direction we need to go as society to find more and more vehicles for these people. But that wasn't why I was up here. First of all, I want to thank all of you for what you've said and done, because I actually have seen Love and Mercy. I'm a person that can experience all kinds of pain. To me, the abuse in that movie was so painful that I really didn't want to see it again, and now I do. So thank you very much. My question, and I think, Chuck, you alluded to it, and I think maybe Richard may have mentioned, I think you make a very important point by saying the documentaries are the best vehicles that we have for helping people at large. And my question is, how can we get these outstanding documentaries into the vehicles, not just for the public, but into the schools and into the hospitals and into the other facilities, any health-related facilities, so that more people will be exposed to it than the people that will go to the movies and pay the price to see them. So, what do you think?
You know, it's not an easy, I mean, I think distribution, there's just, you know, what I'm amazed with, if you have things like Netflix and Hulu and streaming services like that, well, you drill down into the documentary content that's on some of those spaces, and it is really interesting and engaging stuff. So I think, you know, I would put a little bit of the effort back on us as individuals to go out there and seek that stuff out, because it's there. We just, you know, it just might take a little work for us to get to it from time to time. So, yes, ma'am.
Yes, thank you. I'm also from Minneapolis. My name is Cheryl, and the reason I want to stand here and speak for the first time, I've come here many years, but this is the first time I've been willing to talk. And I want to say that one of the greatest things that have happened to me was that I grew up here, went to school here, saw all the buildings ramped, and saw people that bodies were not normal, if we call a body normal. And when I went to Minneapolis, I was shocked. I was shocked at how, I was grateful that I wasn't in a wheelchair. And I never thought I would think anything like that. So I was just astounded when I moved to a place where they were not accommodating to disability, of physical disability. I also believe that we have some excellent education and awareness up in Minneapolis. We also have a theater called Mixed Blood. I go there to have it put in my face And I've seen actors that are deaf. I've seen actors who do, I probably said something wrong, a person that's hearing impaired. We have to watch all of our language. And people who have been in wheelchairs. I've seen all of this been portrayed, and it's excellent because it educates me. It helps me be more compassionate. Now, to try to sum up real quickly, is that I do think, Joe, you hit it on the head when you say it makes us uncomfortable. Because the other thing I heard from a friend of mine who was studying psychology here was that 95% of the population is not normal. I haven't met one person that is, and that's just 5% of the population. So where am I? I'm in that, and I can speak from my own experience from September of this past year till February of this year. I was depressed. I was anxious and sleep deprived, and I thought suicide would be a good option. I now know what it means, and I also know that I'm a strong-willed individual, and my strength and courage was not enough. I had to have a friend who was a psychic nurse, had been a psychic nurse, pull me up and pull me out and tell me I could make it, because I didn't believe it myself. And I can tell you that I'm grateful for all of that, because I really now realize that all of you have taught me, shown me something I want to do, and that is I'm going to have a celebration in September because I made through a very difficult time in my life. I've come through it, and I want people to benefit from what I have, so I'm committing to doing a benefit.
Thank you.
And I just want to come back to this because I want to ask all of you in the audience first, and then any of you can speak to it. Don't you believe we're afraid of seeing it on screen because it's too close to home? And we don't want to look at ourselves. So if there's any of you that can share your own stories, because you have our eyes and you have our ears, we need that from you as well.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, I'll give you the last question.
I'm Rodney from Champaign, and one of the things I most enjoyed about Love and Mercy, I'm not so much a Beach Boys fan until I saw this movie, and it made me realize how people who are artists often struggle with mental issues, but nonetheless can be great contributors to society. And one of the great things about this movie was how it revealed the production process of artists and how musicians go through putting together pieces of work, and it showed insights into how people put music together. I've never seen it done quite like this. And it made me a fan of the Beach Boys, and I want to see the movie again just for that reason, even though I'm more of an R&B person. And it made me realize, like this panel said, people with mental illnesses have more to them than just that aspect of their lives. They can be great contributors to society. And I thank you for revealing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we're running over, but I asked a question and I want an answer. So does anybody want to start?
Okay, this probably will be the oldest film too, so
Okay.
it makes points. It would be David and Lisa from 1962.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Which was sort of the first film that I saw that really made me aware of individuals with mental problems having sort of regular lives, despite their problems.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? I can start with Joe and work my way back.
Okay. I don't see a lot of movies, but when I get a good recommendation, I see it. And since I also teach part-time psychology at Parkland, I would use it to the best of my ability because I think it's important to expose people to ideas. I have a 9-year-old and 12-year-old, so I don't get to see those types of movies much.
Okay.
I've got sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say I have a couple of recommendations. One is this internet-only series called Horace and Pete by Louis C.K., and it's set in a Brooklyn bar, and many of the characters in there are dealing with issues of one kind or another, and there's a major character who has cancer, and that is one aspect of her story, but it's by no means the only thing going on in her story. And And there's another character who has a very severe mental illness, which he medicates with a fairly rarefied form of antipsychotic medication. And he's a major character, and he's played by Steve Buscemi. And there's, you know, a lot of alcoholics. It's a dive bar. But it's not, you know, it's pretty dark at some points, like, you know, The Iceman Cometh is a major, it's like if you put together Cheers, The Iceman Cometh, and All in the Family, you would get this show. But I like that a lot. And then there's a movie that's coming out next weekend called The Meddler with Susan Sarandon. And some of you, if you are even aware of it at all, you may be surprised hearing mentioned in this context, because it's being sold as a wacky movie about a mom who just smothers her daughter. That's not what it's about. It's about a woman in her 60s who was widowed a couple of years before the start of the story, and it's about her and her adult daughter dealing with the loss of this man who was important to them, and how the lived experience of grief is integrated into their daily lives. And I can't remember the last film I saw that was so incredibly realistic about this. And it's really sweet, funny, like it's a terms of endearment kind of tone. It's not a dark, heavy film at all, but there's so many moments in that movie where I saw things where I said, oh my God, I've never seen a movie get that right before. And there was a lot of that kind of thing in the movie. I highly recommend it. One of the greatest Mother's Day films of all time. So take your mother, or if you are a mother, get your child to take you. It kind of, but this is better. I think this is a better movie.
Mark.
Oh, I was going to say I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and after hearing the movies about mental health issues during the 80s and 90s, it was probably a good thing I wasn't old enough to see them at that point. But I was fortunate enough to have a mother who was very encouraging of putting forth media images that portrayed people with stigmas in a positive or at least empathetic light, like Philadelphia. That was the biggest one I remember, is her specifically taking me to see Philadelphia because she knew I needed to understand that. My late father worked in a psychiatric clinic for a few years, and he was not, you know, he didn't hide anything that he wanted to talk with me directly about that. I have an uncle who has a developmental disability, so I grew up with all this. I get it. It's part of who I am, so I understand it. And I'm very happy that I'm doing this right now, looking at movies from that perspective, so that I can try to help other people understand that too.
Thanks. John?
I could just stick with Love and Mercy, just because I think I was in bands, and I remember playing songs and going on tour, and you know, my lead singer would freak out as we were going 85 down the highway, and there's a little bit of, okay, but maybe we should, but I was just thinking about putting a song out there, right? So like, he meets what became his wife later on in life, but that song, God Only Knows, was just out there somewhere, right? Floating around for her to love. And then kind of brings her to him, and in a way becomes like, saves his life, you know? And so I think, like, for me, like what someone said about music, and like, you know, he was doing like, he had like an 8-track, and he was doing multi-tracking, blowing Phil Spector out of the water, and all these just, and he had like mostly hearing in one ear, and just incredible. So like to love music and have been in bands and played terrible shows and toured, and to know that something that you do, divorce him from the fame, right? But a song that you make, that you just have this creative moment,
It's
right?
always there.
And it brings something to you that saves your life. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Philip?
Well, let me mention two. One of them is the Temple Grandin HBO movie. I think Claire Danes did a great job in that. And granted, she's probably not any more typical than the character in Rain Man, but at the same time, she's a real person, and we like to plug her because she's also an alum, right? But it was certainly a very, very good portrayal of the reality of her early career. Another one that I keep coming back to is the movie Lorenzo's Oil.
Yeah.
Which actually is a really bad film to show to families who are trying to go through this, because it tells them what they're supposed to do,
Right.
which is to, you know, drop everything and spend years in the library and get ahead of all the medical research and you know, save your loved one.
Right.
But nevertheless, the feelings that it portrays about how families interact in these situations, I think, very realistic.
All right. Allison.
For me, the movie Mr. Holland's Opus comes to mind. I thought that had a really realistic depiction of the impact that disability can have on family and different relationships and just the different dynamics that it can cause in terms of the way it's accepted or not.
Thank you. Jennifer and Chuck, then you have to be quick because we got to
The Spitfire Grill would be one that I would, and it's just about how often it's people with stigmas that can reach out to other people with stigmas and have connections that other people can't quite figure out.
I'd say Leaving Las Vegas, the tragedy of alcoholism and depression, and it was a great English film called Fish Tank, which deals with poverty and how that affects your behavior as well, a teenage girl struggling with that.
Yeah, a film I saw here, Oslo, August 31st, is the son of an alcoholic who died from his alcoholism. I never understood the power of addiction until, even though I lived with an addict, I didn't understand the power of it until I saw the way it worked in that film. It was a very incredible portrayal. Thank you all. We have gone a little bit over our time, but thank you all for being part of this. I look forward to seeing you all at the film Love and Mercy, 4:30 on Saturday.